Faithful viewers of this program will not be surprised at what happened to Kellyanne Conway today. It has never happened to anyone else working in a White House. For 2 years, we've been reporting on Kellyanne Conway's public and willful violations of the Hatch Act. And today, the Office of Special Counsel, which enforces the Hatch Act, cited our reporting in its report to the president, recommending that President Trump fire Kellyanne Conway. Special counsel is a permanent office run by a Trump appointee, Republican Henry Kerner. This office has nothing to do with Robert Mueller's office, which is also a special counsel's office established within the Justice Department. Henry Kerner was counsel to the House Oversight Committee when it was chaired by Darrell Issa. He was the staff director of investigations for the House Oversight Committee when it was chaired by Republican Jason Chaffetz. Henry Kerner's Washington resume is purely Republican and highly partisan, and even he could not abide the conduct of Kellyanne Conway. In his letter to the president, Henry Kerner said, if Ms. Conway were any other federal employee, her multiple violations of the law would almost certainly result in removal from her federal position. Ms. Conway is a repeat offender. Never has the Office of Special Counsel had to issue multiple reports to the president concerning Hatch Act violations by the same individual. Never. There has never been a Kellyanne Conway on the federal government payroll before. The special counsel's 17-page report begins with a simple sentence that everyone in the federal government not working in the Trump White House understands. Quote, the Hatch Act prohibits federal civilian executive branch employees from using their official authority or influence for the purpose of interfering with or affecting the result of an election. The report specified Kellyanne Conway's multiple violations of the Hatch Act on Twitter and on television, in which she criticized the campaigns of Democratic candidates for president and supported President Trump's re-election campaign. The special counsel cited our reporting on May 1st of this year, showing a Hatch Act violation by Kellyanne Conway in the driveway of the White House. Here's part of what we reported that night. Here is Kellyanne Conway breaking the law again today.
Oh, we must be worried about Biden. Look what Kellyanne said about him today. So thanks for the free commercial about all the things Joe Biden didn't get done for the 8 years he was vice president.
And she's right. It is a free commercial, and it is an illegal free commercial.
I do find it fascinating that the former Vice President Joe Biden said that he asked President Obama not to endorse him. Do not endorse me. But we know he's open to endorsements because he got it from the management of the firefighters. It will be fascinating to watch the other candidates who are tied with a margin of error in most polls in the Democratic. I can talk about them, too, if you'd like. No problem.
Yes, problem. Very serious problem. It's the problem of breaking the law. And here's how the special counsel's office described that violation of the Hatch Act. On May 1st, 2019, during an interview in the White House driveway, Ms. Conway again brought up Mr. Biden unprompted. In segments of the interview that were broadcast by Lawrence O'Donnell, Ms. Conway said about her prior comments concerning Mr. Biden, so thanks for the free commercial about all the things Joe Biden didn't get done for the 8 years he was vice president. Ms. Conway also commented that she found it fascinating that Mr. Biden said he asked former President Obama not to endorse him, and that it was also going to be fascinating to watch the Democratic candidates who were not doing well in the polls. On the topic of those Democratic candidates, Ms. Conway dismissively said, I can talk about them too if you like, no problem. The facts set forth above show that Ms. Conway engaged in a well-established pattern of using her official authority as a platform to engage in blatantly partisan attacks. Such political activity in her official capacity constitutes a clear and continuing violation of the Hatch Act. The sheer number of occurrences underscores the egregious nature of her violations. The White House counsel's office wrote an 11-page reply defending Kellyanne Conway by essentially saying the Hatch Act does not apply to, quote, the most senior advisors to the president. The White House counsel filled most of their pages with process objections to the way the Office of the Special Counsel conducted its ongoing investigation of Kellyanne Conway. The White House counsel dismissed the very concept that the Hatch Act could be violated on Twitter, saying, quote, the Hatch Act does not specifically address activities on social media. That sentence is true. The Hatch Act does not specifically address social media, because the Hatch Act was written in 1939. The Hatch Act does not address TV commercials either, because they had not been invented in 1939. But that doesn't mean White House staff can appear in campaign commercials for the president's reelection, and none ever have. And the White House counsel's office just made up the idea that senior White House officials are exempt from the Hatch Act. No one has ever believed that before. Libel law, by the way, does not specifically mention social media either, but you can absolutely libel someone on Twitter right now, and every lawyer in America knows that, and every lawyer in Washington knows that the White House counsel wrote a legally empty defense of Kellyanne Conway today. The special counsel's report began with what Kellyanne Conway said publicly about her own violations of the Hatch Act. After my many tweets about Kellyanne Conway's Hatch Act violations and our reporting on her violations on the Hatch Act on this program, finally, at the end of May this year, a reporter asked her about her violations of the Hatch Act, and her response became the very first sentence in the special counsel's report. In a May 2019 interview, Ms. Kellyanne Conway, counselor to the president, reportedly scoffed at her responsibilities under the Hatch Act and ridiculed its enforcement by asserting, "Let me know when the jail sentence starts." Her defiant attitude is inimical to the law, and her continued pattern of misconduct is unacceptable. The U.S. Office of Special Counsel calls on President Donald J. Trump to remove Ms. Conway from her federal position immediately. The White House counsel's response to that was, quote, "Ms. Conway's comment was taken out of context." Okay. Here's the context. Here's what happened after a reporter asked Kellyanne Conway in the White House driveway about violating the Hatch Act. First, she did what she does to most questions. She ignored it and did a full 3-minute rant against Joe Biden, ending this way.
Joe Biden, all that is part of his record. I don't care that he's running for president. I could care less. What I care about is people lying about their records and being hypocrites, and people who are supposed to be informing the president about such hypocrisy not doing so. If you're trying to silence me through the Hatch Act, it's not going to work.
I'm not trying to silence you. The Office of Special Counsel said you violated it.
Let me know when the jail sentence starts.
Or should we expect the president?
How's that for context? And then, as usual, another White House reporter took the pressure off by changing the subject. The special counsel's report says Ms. Conway's persistent, notorious, and deliberate Hatch Act violations have created an unprecedented challenge to this office's ability to enforce the act. Ms. Conway defiantly rejected the Hatch Act's application to her activities and flippantly stated, "Let me know when the jail sentence starts." And she made it clear that she has no plans to cease abusing her official position to influence voters. Now, this would be the biggest scandal in most previous White Houses, but the special counsel's recommendation to fire Kellyanne Conway for violating the Hatch Act comes the day after the president said that he himself would violate federal law to win re-election if a foreign country offered him information on his re-election campaign opponent. The president said, "I think I'd want to hear it. They have information. I think I'd take it." Those are his exact words. The president said that the FBI director is wrong to say that that is a crime. And so today, in perfect symmetry to what the president said yesterday, comes the case of Kellyanne Conway. And the White House says that the special counsel is just wrong about the law, wrong about the Hatch Act, which the special counsel is in charge of enforcing. It's all the same story. Every day of the Trump administration is another piece of the same story, the story that began with Donald Trump's inauguration. Today it was Kellyanne Conway's turn to play her role in that story. The special counsel summarized Kellyanne Conway's role in the story of the Trump presidency in one perfect sentence today. Her actions erode the principal foundation of our democratic system, the rule of law. That's the story. That's the story of Donald Trump's presidency. The president whose actions erode the principal foundation of our democratic system, the rule of law. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on the button below for more from The Last Word and the rest of MSNBC.